Hey, man, hey, Trey, it ain't just about having fun, man. Yes, remember the time you played your best football game of your life. Yes, sir. Remember the time after that victory you went to CC Pizza and celebrated with the boys. For real. Feel it in your heart, man. It's a long way back to Cleveland. Let's not leave it without a victory. All right? So put everything you got on the line today. Let's have a game of memory, man. All right? I remember. Let's go. Family number 3. 1, 2, 3, go.
Fantasy Football Happy Hour with Matthew Berry, served by Applebee's.
Welcome to the Fantasy Football Happy Hour. I'm Connor Rogers alongside Matthew Berry, Jay Croucher. Guys, nothing gets me ready for a show like a Jameis Winston pregame speech.
We should bring him in.
I would love that.
We should just, fire us up. We have our big show draft, the league that I'm the defending champ at, no big deal. But we have it on Thursday, and I'd like to bring him in. Let's find out if we have that in the budget to bring Jameis in to fire us up before we go into the draft.
I feel like he's going to be pretty.
A cameo?
Probably. I feel like he's going to be pretty busy this year playing football. If Deshaun Watson's injury history is anything to go by.
I said that last night. We did this Football Night in America pod, and we did a rapid fire thing. And one of the questions was, at the end of the year, Deshaun Watson is a top blank quarterback. And so Coach Goedert was like top 15, and I was like top 32. Yeah, I mean, like,
yeah.
And
is that too far?
Maybe, right? I mean, I completely agree with you. Like, it feels like Deshaun Watson's arm is shot, and that we will see Jameis Winston at some point this year. Like, Watson's already got arm soreness again this year. Like, it just, I don't know. Anyway, I'm getting us off track.
Well, we have a fun
Which
show
is what
today.
I do. It's what I do. It's on brand.
It's okay. We're starting positional previews today. First ones will be tight ends,
Yes.
which includes our season-long bets for some of the biggest names at the position. But first, a lot of football to catch you up on from the weekend as the preseason is officially in the books.
And I was just going to say, this is the biggest draft week of the season, right? This is the big, and leading up to this upcoming weekend, which is the biggest draft weekend of the year. And so what we're going to do this whole week is first off, we're going to update you everything you need to know over the weekend, and we'll do tight ends today. But also, every day is going to be positional ranks. Like, it's going to be a running back day, then it's a wide receiver, a quarterback. We're going to go through all the positions, get you ready for big drafts this weekend.
But before we do that, the preseason Week 3 reaction for teams that played their starters, we have to start with the Steelers. And Matthew, you brought up the Football Night in America pod. You had a really interesting response when quarterback came up. Take a listen.
Come November, the Steelers starting quarterback will be whom?
Justin Fields. They have to see what they got out of this kid at some point. I don't think they'll be in the hunt. So Justin Fields.
Okay.
I'd love to say Kyle Allen just for fun, but I think Russell Wilson's going to hang on to the job. They've got some tough games early. They got some primetime games. They understand what they're trying to do offensively and defensively, and I think Mike Tomlin is going to make a decision. He's going to stick with it for as long as he can.
Yeah, I agree. I think Mike Tomlin says, hey, we're going to win games on defense. They just need Russell Wilson to do what he did last year. If he can just be that same guy, they'll be in it and they'll stay with him.
9-time Pro Bowler in Seattle. The formula was run the football, play great defense, Russell make a handful of plays during the game. That's what we're trying to recreate there in Pittsburgh. They have the right guy in Arthur Smith to do it. I still think he'll be their starting quarterback.
Maybe not the hero we need, but the one we deserve. Matthew Berry, standing alone
on an island.
Yeah.
On an island.
Fields Island.
That's exactly.
More like standing on a field, I guess.
I mean, you've got a couple of Super Bowl champions on that desk. You got Mike Florio and super smart. But I'm just going to tell you, I don't think Russell Wilson is the long-term answer in Pittsburgh. I don't. Right? I mean, he's on a very short contract here, and I understand what they're saying, and I would argue that if the Steelers are in the hunt, then I agree with everyone else that's on that panel there. If the Steelers have a legit shot, but you just think about that division with Cleveland and Cincinnati and Baltimore, you know what I mean? And that basically you're saying like, hey, Russell Wilson, we just need to be a game manager. Justin Fields is a guy who's a former top 12 pick who was considered, he's a first-round pick overall. And so he has made some brilliant plays this preseason. He's also made some like head-scratching, like what are you doing kind of plays. And so my argument here is that Justin Fields is potentially a franchise quarterback. He potentially also isn't. But I just feel like they've got him on this dirt cheap deal, and that at some point, I don't think Russell Wilson is the future in Pittsburgh. Justin Fields might be. He also might not be, but I feel like Pittsburgh's going to have to give him an extended look to figure out, hey, next year, do we need to start over at the quarterback position, or is Justin Fields somebody that we can build around long term? Because there are some skills in there. We saw it at Ohio State.
Absolutely, and I'm interested in, this is going to be a good defense. We know that. It's a team that can win ugly. They're going to want to run the ball. Does Fields' rushing ability just simply give them more?
Yes.
Right? Simply give them more for an offense that, in theory, Jay, doesn't need a lot. They don't need to be a superstar top 5, top 10 offense with how the defense is and how they play under Tomlin. And does that little extra rushing element from Fields eventually give him the edge? Maybe not in September, and you didn't say that.
No.
But maybe down the line where they're like, man, we just need an ounce more and we're going to flip some of these one-score games.
Yeah, I think last year Russell Wilson was 18th in PFF grade. He was 18th in EPA per play. By the eye test, he was about the 18th best quarterback in the NFL, and there's no reason to think that he should really get better. He just seems to have lost the step athletically. He's just everything that made Russ special, the speed, the deep ball, like that has largely migrated to last year. He was checking down so much more. So I think that Russell Wilson, he just kind of is what he is. And there's this idea that he is what that team wants, that they want to be this defense ball control team. Like I think on offense, they want to be a team that runs the ball. And I think that Arthur Smith would surely prefer to have the upside of Justin Fields and prefer to have that rushing upside and the threat of Fields and what it unlocks in the run game. Now, it seems like they're going to start with Russ. I think what helps Russ is that the first part of their schedule is the easier part, where they don't have to play Baltimore or Cleveland, either of those top 2 elite defenses, until after their bye. So the first 10 weeks, they don't play either of those teams, even though they're in division. So I suspect it is going to be Russ, but I would say that it is greater than 50% chance that Justin Fields gets in there at some point as the starter.
And just to your point about how run heavy they want to be, again, this is a stat that I've used in relation to Lamar Jackson, but I think it's relevant here, that since Lamar Jackson became the starting quarterback of the Baltimore Ravens, Ravens running backs are averaging 4.8 yards per carry, which is best in the NFL. Again, we've done this study, but like the more mobile the quarterback, the more open lanes there are for running backs. So to your point, the threat of Justin Fields, I think, would open things up for Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren. And just we know how run heavy Arthur Smith wants to be. I mean, honestly, like the Falcons stuck with Desmond Ridder much longer than they should have been. And I would argue that it is because of the threat of Desmond Ridder's legs that's why that happened. Because, the passing was not great.
Not where you want it to be. Some other interesting nuggets from the Steelers offense. Van Jefferson, 93% route participation with Russ. He looks to be their wide receiver 2, Matthew. And then a more interesting scenario that could be a committee. Pat Freiermuth, 60% route participation with Russell Wilson this preseason. This could be a committee with Darnell Washington.
Yeah, we forget how much they like Darnell Washington, and he was highly touted coming out. It's interesting. Like I thought Freiermuth might be a sleeper just because Arthur Smith teams have traditionally, you go back to like Delaney Walker, and they've actually tried to. I know everyone that's ever had Kyle Pitts on their fantasy team is screaming at the screen right now, going like, "What are you talking about?"
Right.
But they have tried to target the tight end.
Jonnu Smith, resurrected.
Like, no, I know that was the problem. But also to your point about Jonnu Smith, Arthur Smith likes big-bodied tight ends, so maybe they want, especially given the fact that they want to run the ball as much, maybe Washington on the field more than anyone that's drafting Freiermuth would like to be. But as we wait to find out what's going to happen with Brandon Ayuk, at the moment, Van Jefferson, who had some nice moments with the Rams, to your point, is just suddenly no one is drafting Van Jefferson, and we don't think it's going to be a great passing offense. But if you're in a deep league, and we're all in an 18-team league. If you're in a deep league, Michael Smith is in his crazy deep leagues. Van Jefferson is suddenly on the radar as somebody who, is going to play more than I think people realize.
And a team that'll matter a lot in deep leagues because they're deep at pass catcher, Jay, is Jacksonville. Brian Thomas Jr., their rookie first-rounder wide receiver, 81% route participation with Trevor Lawrence this preseason. Gabe Davis, 100%. I mean, this is a deep wide receiver room. That's without talking about Christian Kirk and a guy like Evan Ingram that had a 29% target share from Lawrence this preseason.
Yeah, Brian Thomas has lit up training camp by all accounts. Plenty of viral highlights. Kind of reminds me a little bit of George Pickens from 2 years ago. But what do you think, Connor? Do you think that is he polished enough where he could be, the next breakout great rookie wide receiver?
From a fantasy perspective, just this year, because I love Brian Thomas Jr. for the long term. I think he could be a number 1, a star. It feels like it's going to be a little Rashid Shaheed-like this year, where you get the 2 catches for 82 yards, and you're like, man, I got to go get him on the waivers, or I'm glad I drafted him late. And then the next week, you might get 1 catch for 9 yards. There's just a lot of mouths to feed in this offense. He is a rookie. He is a guy that, coming out of college, was all about the vertical speed. He's got all the talent in the world. But, Matthew, I don't know if there'll be a massive fantasy volume impact year 1 for him.
No, I think that's the challenge here. I feel like the hype on him is getting a little bit too much, again, because I just feel like they're going to spread it around in Jacksonville. And let me put it this way. I think there's going to be some big games for him, but I think there'll be some big games for Gabe Davis. And I think, if I'm investing in the Jacksonville passing game, give me Christian Kirk. That's who I want, who's going to be able to play the slot full time, which is where he's most effective. He's got the history with Doug Peterson. He's got the history with Trevor Lawrence. When I spoke to Doug Peterson at the Combine, Kirk is who he specifically mentioned about how they feel like he's much more effective in the slot, and that's where they want to play him. So that was part of the reasons why they went out and drafted Brian Thomas Jr. It's why they signed Gabe Davis as a free agent. You've got Ingram there as well, and obviously Etienne's going to touch the ball a lot. So I feel like this is one of those guys that really like him a lot, but feels like you're going to have to wait till the second half of the year for him to pay off. And I don't know that it's going to be consistently unless there's an injury.
The Panthers often a offense in fantasy that's left for dead, but Matthew, kind of interesting is Bryce Young looks better in his second training camp, second preseason.
Almost would have to be.
Diontae Johnson in town, 29% target share from Bryce on that one drive.
Yeah.
Adam Thielen's still out there, 92% route participation with Young, 64% in the slot. So the Panthers could have a notable pass catcher this year. It's just a matter of, do you have to pick between Thielen and Diontae Johnson? You probably lean Johnson, obviously.
Yeah, I don't think you have to pick between them. You're just picking Diontae Johnson.
Adam Thielen was wildly productive for what we thought he was going to be last year with Bryce Young.
But my point is that as bad as Bryce Young was last year, for the first 9 weeks of the season, Adam Thielen was like, a top 10 fantasy wide receiver.
He supported him.
He was ridiculous. And so Dave Canales has already come out and said, we're going to run this offense through Diontae Johnson. I think Diontae Johnson has always been somebody that, he's had this weird bad touchdown luck when he was in Pittsburgh, but he's always been a very talented player. Very talented, great route runner. And so the fact that Bryce Young looks better, the fact that there are other weapons besides Diontae Johnson that you still have to, you're still going to have to cover Adam Thielen. You're still going to have to deal with Jonathan Mingo and Xavier Legette and, all the guys there in Carolina. Especially, by the way, once they get Jonathan Brooks back. I have a lot. I'll just say this. I have a lot of Diontae Johnson because he always goes cheap. He always goes in the middle rounds, and he's just going to get cheap volume. He's like, if you went zero wide receiver, again, that's not really a thing, but he's a good, as we talked about zero RB, those cheap volume guys in the middle rounds. I feel like Diontae Johnson is the wide receiver version of that no one's going to be excited about him, but he's going to get just massive volume. And Bryce Young being even 15% better than he was last year is going to be a massive improvement.
Yep. Diontae keeps on getting banged up at training camp, but it seems all fine. It seems like he's going to play. There just seem minor knocks. Said this before, I'll say it again. Dave Canales on DraftKings is plus 1,800 to win Coach of the Year, and the Panthers are plus 550 to make the playoffs. That doesn't reconcile. If they make the playoffs, he's going to get a ton of credit for fixing Bryce Young, and it seems like there's a chance that Bryce Young is fixed.
Again, this is somebody who fixed Geno Smith in Seattle, fixed Baker Mayfield, and now, to your point, if they fix Bryce Young, and what's crazy is we've talked about this before, but just if C.J. Stroud wasn't C.J. Stroud last year, it doesn't make as big a spotlight on Bryce Young. Bryce Young was the #1 overall pick in the NFL draft a year ago, and no one was going what are the Panthers doing?
Right.
There was some debate about him versus Stroud, but no one was like, whoa, what's with that guy? There was more controversy about Baker Mayfield at #1 overall going into that draft
with
Darnold than there was, which is great, But no seriousness, right? Versus versus Bryce Young. Bryce Young was considered by everyone to be one of the top 2 quarterbacks in the draft last year, and so a guy that was that productive at Alabama doesn't suddenly just can't play football.
Yep, and tying into that, look how good the Colts offense looked last year, and particularly their offensive line looked after Frank Reich left. And so maybe that is another element of this, the Frank Reich leaving Carolina. Canales comes in. I think there's a lot of upside for the Panthers on offense.
Staying in the division with the Bucs, rookie Jalen McMillan, 100% of the snaps of Baker Mayfield. He should open the season as the wide receiver 3 in an offense that has Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. And Jay, the backfield kind of shaping up in an interesting fashion. Besides Rashad White, Bucky Irving has established himself as the clear-cut running back too, especially with a Chase Edmonds injury.
Yeah, and I don't think that Rashad White is at the level where he is guaranteed this ironclad vice grip on the starting job, because he was sub 4.0 yards per carry last year. Jalen McMillan is interesting. It doesn't seem like this offense is going to be able to support a third wide receiver for fantasy value, but if Godwin goes down or if Mike Evans goes down, then it gets interesting. It's just interesting overall to see how committed the Bucs are to the run this year, because last year it felt like they were running for the sake of it a lot.
That was a Canales thing. I mean, Canales actually spoke about that at the Combine, that he's like, even if we were getting 3.3 yards per carry, 3.5, we just wanted to keep establishing the run. All those cliches, but we wanted to just keep, grinding it out, because that would open up things for the passing game, and just being committed to the run game regardless of how successful it was. And he felt like, and by the end of the year, they felt like they were getting somewhere with it, which, by the way, speaks two things. Number one, it suddenly makes Chuba Hubbard interesting in the beginning part of the year, and Jonathan Brooks very interesting over the final three-fourths of the year. But also, like, will the Buccaneers coaching staff have the same commitment to Rachaad White and the run game that they did under Canales? And if they do, again, it was so much volume with Rachaad, which is one of the reasons why Rachaad White was on the hate list, is because I do think you're going to see more Bucky Irving. I'm not convinced they run as much as they do, and even if the volume in the run game is the same, I think Bucky Irving, because of the camp he's had, will take some of that workload off of Rachaad White. And so Rachaad White is going as a top 15 running back to me. It's just too pricey a tag. I do want to say real quickly, though, all these stats that we're giving out, like 29% target share, the 92% route participation, that's Diontae Johnson and Adam Thielen, for example. All these stats we're giving out, courtesy of our friend Dwayne McFarland at fantasylife.com. He charts every preseason game, every single drive, does an unbelievable job, and writes an unbelievable article that's one of the most useful as you head into drafts, 100% free at fantasylife.com. Like, look, I'm not just a fan, I'm an owner. Like, I hired the guy because I think he's so good. But anyway, I just want to give a shout out, because this is all courtesy of Dwayne McFarland and his work at fantasylife.com.
And more of his work, an important note for the 49ers, Jordan Mason, 88% of the snaps and 74% of the rushing attempts with the starters. Elijah Mitchell did not play. We know Christian McCaffrey's been hurt here, Matthew. It appears that Jordan Mason is the number 2 back in a potent run game.
If anything were to happen to Christian McCaffrey, Jordan Mason's a top 10 fantasy running back. I mean, and so he has, I feel like, more importantly, that because there was some talk about Elijah Mitchell, but it feels like if you watch that, like, Jordan Mason just runs with explosiveness, with power. And so you just sort of think, like, man, like, I just think, especially in best ball, he's an interesting flyer as well, but just, I think I'm not always the biggest, hey, you have to draft an insurance back, especially because I think there's some things that are sort of unclear. But yeah, as you see a McCaffrey jersey over my shoulder here, if you're investing in Christian McCaffrey, make sure you get Jordan Mason.
Yep. 2020, Christian McCaffrey played 3 games. 2021, Christian McCaffrey played 7 games. He's dealt with soft tissue injuries twice in the past 8 months. So look, McCaffrey, he should be fine, but if he isn't, then all of a sudden Jordan Mason could be the lead running back in potentially the best offense in football.
And remember, the 49ers are a team that, played in the Super Bowl last year and have designs on going back there this year. And the reason I bring that up is that the way Kyle Shanahan and his team think about this season is they're not thinking about an 18-week season. They're thinking about a 22-week season. Like, they're like, we need to go, Christian needs to be healthy in the postseason as we try to get through the NFC Championship, we try to get back to a Super Bowl. And so I feel like when it's week 11 and they're like, and they're 2 games up in the division and he's not feeling great, like, you know what? We still got a lot of football ahead of us. So I think unlike other teams, there'll be more of a caution around Christian McCaffrey, making sure he's healthy, again, because this is a team with legitimate Super Bowl aspirations.
One of the most interesting storylines of the preseason, guys, has been the quarterback competition in New England that once upon a time felt like Jacoby Brissett was nearly a lock to win. Brissett leaves with a shoulder injury in the first quarter of the final preseason game. And Drake May with a good showing. He's gotten better every stretch of the way throughout training camp in the preseason. 13 to 20, 126 yards and a touchdown. And something we keep talking about on this show, he's just a different level of athlete back there with the mobility.
Yep, and I think that is reflected in, to me, the most important stat from Drake May's performance last night. 0 sacks. And that might be the most important thing for New England quarterback. And obviously Brissett gets
goes down hard,
after breakdown, and we'll see exactly the extent of his shoulder injury. But look, Drake May is going to be the starting quarterback of this team, whether it's in week 1 or whether it's shortly after that. It certainly seems like. Connor, do you think from a fantasy perspective that he elevates any of the wide receivers, or that he could provide fantasy value himself because of what he gives you on the ground?
If they put Jalen Polk on the field, that's the guy that gets elevated, because there's going to be a connection there between the 2 rookies. What scares you with Drake May from a fantasy perspective, if he has to play out of the gate, is that They play the Jets in Cleveland in the first 3 weeks. I believe they go to San Francisco. They play the Jets again in week 8. They play a ton of really tough teams.
Yeah.
I mean, they have a murderer's row of defenses. I'm sure Buffalo is in there somewhere. So that's where it gets a little scary if Drake May has to play right away.
Here's the other thing, too, right? Think about that offensive line. I mean, like that's a bad offensive line in New England. And so, yes, the mobility of Drake May maybe helps you with that.
He's going to need it.
But I just think if you think about the New England franchise for a second and just take fantasy out of it for a second, but just talk about, they don't want to Mac Jones this kid. Mac Jones had a really nice rookie year, and then it just became a disaster. The team got worse, the line got worse, the coaching, McDaniels leaves.
That was the key.
And all of a sudden, Mac Jones, who was like a mid-first-round pick, and everyone's just like, wow, looked like the Patriots, did a great job, right? And everything like that. And they've got another star in their hands. And now all of a sudden, they're giving away to Jacksonville where he's a backup. And so I think that New England, just as an organization, is like, we want to make sure that Drake May works. And you don't, to your point, do you want to really throw him to the wolves behind a bad offensive line, having to play the Jets and the Browns and these really amazing defenses early on? Because the other thing that I think people forget about Drake May is like not a large body of work. This is not a guy that was a 4-year starter in college. This isn't Michael Penix, right? I mean, how many games did he stay? Right.
I think he started as a freshman. He had multi-year starter, but he's not a guy that played 4 seasons, 5 seasons, right? And he wasn't always on a great team.
Right.
Those guys, like Bo Nix and Michael Penix and Jaden Daniels last year, played in big games.
Yes.
Really big games. In the ACC, I'm not, downgrading it, but Drake May wasn't playing for a college football playoff at the end of the year every year.
Right. Yeah, so I think they want it's tough. I mean, now it may, as of this taping, we don't know the extent of the injury to Jacoby Brissett, so it may be moot. It may be, sorry, Drake, get out there.
Here's the schedule.
You're next back up.
At Cincinnati, then they play the Seahawks at home, at the Jets on a short week, at the 49ers after Thursday Night Football, then they play Miami, the Texans, Jacksonville, who can have a tough defense this year, then they play the Jets again.
That's a brutal schedule of defenses. You see it right there on your screen. And by the way, think about that home game against the Seahawks. You think Mike McDonald isn't going to have that defense humming this year?
They're going to be flying around.
Exactly. Of the defenses from last year, the Seahawks were the worst, but that's why they hired Mike McDonald. And so, that's a really kind of a murderer's row of defenses if you're a rookie behind a shaky offensive line to have to go out there and start. And so I think if there's any way that Jacoby Brissett can play, he'll be the starter, at least initially. But it'd be interesting to see. So fantasy-wise, I don't think I want Drake May unless it's like a 2-quarterback league, Superflex league, and even then he's like a 3rd quarterback. But there is a little bit of upside with the legs. But I agree with you. Jalen Polk becomes interesting if May's the starter.
Yep. Guys, the most important nugget from the final preseason game, Martavis Bryant is back and lethal with the Commanders. Martavis Bryant drinks free after 3 catches, 20 yards, and his first touchdown catch in 6 years.
Welcome back to the league, Martavis Bryant. It's just a good story. We'll see if he makes the team. Feels like he might, with John Dotson now in Philadelphia. But either way, it's just sort of the idea of a guy 6 years later getting into an NFL end zone. So anyway, good for you, Martavis Bryant. Good for you, man. Hail the Commanders. Hail victory. There he is.
Just checking now on DraftKings Sportsbook. Martavis Bryant to win the receiving title, 60 million to 1.
All right, there we go.
Could be worth a fly.
Maybe $1
yeah.
on that.
He's a deep ball threat.
Yeah. Well, how much for comeback
player
of the year?
Yeah, that's the one we want to know.
I can't talk about that award. It's Kyler Murray this year. We decided. We're getting him home. Let's go, Kyler.
Oh, man. The Roto-World Draft Guide is here for you during the peak of draft season, and this year it has added features. Available exclusively through a new partnership with Matthew Berry's Fantasy Life. Get a Fantasy Life Plus subscription and receive the Roto-World Draft Guide to help you crush your competition. Use promo code ROTO10 for 10% off and unlock extensive fantasy, DFS, and betting tools now. Go to NBCSports.com/fantasylife to learn more. We're taking our first break. When we're back, our tight end preview for the season is coming right up.
Once you try these tools, you will be hooked. They're unbelievable.
Clear the Shelters, NBC Universal's Locals annual nationwide pet adoption and donation campaign returns for its 10th consecutive year, August 10th to September 10th. As part of the month-long campaign, NBC and Telemundo owned and affiliated stations across the U.S. and Puerto Rico partner with animal shelters and rescue services in their communities to promote pet adoption and raise funds to support animal welfare. One of our own makes the list. This is Fry. You can see he's ready to watch his owner, Dev, and help Dev maybe beat Barry in this season's championship rematch, potentially.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know.
Fry's
That's the
tuning
look
in
of a
somewhere.
dog that steals tight ends is what that is right there.
Gets all the tight ends from the waivers,
Yeah.
except Juwan Johnson. Never forget.
Never forget.
All right, let's get into our tight end
Juwan
preview.
By the way, I mean, we do a new one every day, but Juwan Johnson drinks free for life at the happy hour
For
bar.
you.
Juwan Johnson drinks free for
Everyone
life.
else charges
at
him
the-
double.
Yeah.
Never forget him, Juwan Johnson turning into peak Antonio Gates against the Bucks. One random
Desperation.
Game. Yeah.
I called my shot. You got to give me credit on that. I
was
called
good.
my
No,
shot.
no, it's good.
I,
Yeah.
before
No denying it.
I said I'm picking him up and he's going to have a huge game this week, and he did. He did for me. Stupid Dev.
It's not stupid Fry, though.
No, we love Fry.
Yeah,
Fry's
he's stupid Dev.
Fry's an awesome. Yeah, stupid Dev.
Okay.
With his cute dog Fry.
Shout out to Fry. All right, before we get into rankings, tiers, and any of that, Matthew, just what is your overall approach to drafting tight end this year? It's finally changed a little bit. So long as Kelsey and then everyone else.
My strategy about tight end this year, number one, is I think you should have one. I feel like
That's
you
a good
should,
idea.
I think you should not ignore the position. That's strategy number one. No, honestly, like I think when you
Phenomenal
sort of look,
work.
what?
Phenomenal work.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
God bless.
Way to really kick us off this segment.
Producer Steven, do me a favor. Just clip that off and send that to the Smithsonian and the Emmy Award Committee, if you will. Thank you very much. Got it. All right. Thank you. All right. So my strategy for approaching, I think you want an elite tight end this year. My strategy used to be kind of, hey, I want to be one of the first guys in my league or one of my last. But honestly, as you look at it, there's not nearly as many sleepers at tight end this year. There is a clear tier. And unlike last year or previous years where it was like Kelsey, and then there's a little tier, and then there was some more sleepers, here it's more concentrated. Like, ideally, you really want a top 5 tight end this year. And if not a top 5, you definitely want like a top 8. And if not a top 8, definitely at least a top 10. Like, I want a tight end 1 this year. There's a couple of sleepers that we'll talk about here, but I feel much less certain about them breaking out or them having consistent week-to-week fantasy value. There are 5 tight ends that I feel really, really good about, and then after the 5, there's a couple more that I think you can get away with that are above average. But honestly, this year, I think it's really important to have an elite tight end.
Yeah, I do think the one aspect, though, is that the fact that you can get guys like Jake Ferguson as the 9th tight end off the board, David Njoku at 10. I feel like that is perhaps stronger than, I think last year we were talking about guys like Cole Kmet and that type of range. So I do think there is a little bit of depth, but certainly the separation between your Laportas and your McBrides and then going further down to, a tight end 11, your Dallas Goederts is fairly significant.
But what my argument, and I agree with you, like I'm a big Jake Ferguson guy, and we'll talk about him in a second, but once you get past the top 5, you can start, nitpicking a lot of these guys. And so again, like that's what I'm saying is like you just start getting to those, like, kind of talk yourself into it. And again, I'm a Jake Ferguson believer this year, but like if you want to take the negative side of him, or some of those guys in the 6 through 10, you certainly can. And so I guess in terms of, because there's really nice depth at wide receiver, there's nice depth at quarterback, there's also nice, at running back, there's some cheap volume in the mid rounds, and there's always guys that come in the league that will be a fill-in running back for 3-4 weeks. We talked about the Jordan Masons of the world, that they get some run. My point is like, again, it's not just about what you do with this position, but it's about what you do with this position in terms of how you construct your overall roster for the entire season. And my point is that on a weekly basis, you don't want a hole at tight end. When you're going head-to-head with somebody, you don't want a hole at tight end. Like, I feel like it is easier to match up, like, okay, you've got a better quarterback than me, but I think I can battle that better. I can battle your wide receiver. I can battle your running back depth. It's easier to battle that every other position than it is tight end, where it's just like if you have an elite tight end and I don't, then I'm just praying for a touchdown.
Yep.
You know, and that's just such high variance.
Yep, no, I think that makes sense. And there are guys, like if you go in with Brock Bowers as your tight end one, there are probably going to be weeks where he just does not much because of how weird that Raiders offense is and the fact he's already dealing with injuries. Whereas if you go in with Laporta, Kelsey, McBride, Andrews, one of those four, you can have extreme confidence that they are going to get peppered with targets.
So let's look at the tier drop-offs that we're talking about based on rankings, right? We'll show rankings 1 through 10 and kind of dive into the top 2 tiers from here. As tier 1, it's not a lot of surprise. Sam Laporta, Travis Kelsey, Trey McBride, who you really like a lot, Matthew, a ride or die finalist.
Yep.
Mark Andrews, and then Dalton Kincaid. That is tier 1. Where it cuts off to tier 2 and starts is with George Kittle, Evan Ingram, Jake Ferguson, who you have ahead of Kyle Pitts. I think that goes against consensus. And then Kyle Pitts. David Njoku does not start till tier 3. So
that's correct.
We'll get into 11 through 20 in a second, but I want to start with Mark Andrews, Matthew, because we don't talk a lot about him on this show compared to other guys. Maybe it's because when he plays, he's just consistently good. I mean, 14.6 points per game last year. The question always with him seems to be health in this situation.
For sure.
Still an elite tight end.
Friend of the podcast, Mark Andrews, you mentioned that, the 14.6 fantasy points per game. That was his in 9 full games, but on a full season, that had been tight end 3. Second year in the Todd Monken offense. We obviously all like Lamar. There are not many tight ends that you can say this about, but like Mark Andrews very legitimately could lead his team in targets, receiving yards, and touchdowns, right? And so there aren't a lot of tight ends. Like Kelsey was that guy for a while, although I think Rashee Rice is going to challenge him this year for that. McBride, him and Harrison are going to go back and forth. Laporta, him and Amon-Ra St. Brown, those are the guys there. But legitimately, Mark Andrews could be the leading pass catcher on the Ravens in all the categories we care about. And so health is always a concern. But the nice thing about Mark Andrews here, especially when it comes to health, and I know this is going to sound weird, but we just talk about this again usually with running backs. But this is the one case where there's actually an insurance tight end. Like if you invest a high draft in Mark Andrews, if you grab Isaiah Likely in the last round of your draft, right? He's not going drafted that much, towards the end, then you've locked up a tight end position for every week of the season except for one, and you're going to get elite top 5 fantasy tight end production there. 36% of his team's red zone targets last year. That led all tight ends for Mark Andrews. That's the most important thing too. It's not just how involved he is in the passing offense overall, but just how important he is to that offense when they get in close. Lamar always looks for him as well. 5 straight seasons finishing as a top 5 fantasy tight end on a points per game basis. So the consistency is there about Mark Andrews. I just feel like people are excited about the emergence of Laporta. People are worried about the drop off with Kelsey. Trey McBride is another emerging player. Everyone's excited about the potential of Kincaid in year 2. No one's talking about Mark Andrews, and yet he's just sort of there, and he's going to be a top 4 fantasy tight end again. And so I think that I want in an ideal world, I want one of those 5 tight ends. Laporta, Kelsey, McBride, Andrews, Kincaid. And that's the order I have them in.
Yep. So 2 things on Andrews. One, we've spoken about this previously, but I think an underrated storyline of the offseason is that Ravens added nothing at receiver. Their number 2 and number 3 wide receivers are still Rashad Bateman and Nelson Aguilar, and the number 1 is Zay Flowers, who's not like 2021 Cooper Kupp gobbling up targets. So Andrews should still be the guy. And then the second thing with the Ravens, I think this ties into why Lamar is being perhaps a little bit underrated too, as well as Zay Flowers. Last year they were just leading in every single game. I'm not sure what the exact stat is, but it's 99.5% of the season they were within at least a score of their opponent. They were just constantly in these game scripts where they could run the ball. They were never ever in catch-up mode where they just had to sit back and Lamar would just have to air it out in 3rd and 4th quarters. And so just by the fact that they're probably not going to be in that situation this year where they're just leading every single game, they're going to have to be second halves where they're throwing more, and Andrews and Flowers and Lamar should all benefit statistically.
Now, Matthew, everything you said about Andrews, can that also apply to Dalton Kincaid, where he could lead his team in targets and receiving touchdowns as well?
241 targets are no longer on the team, with Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis now on different teams. And yes, we expect an expanded role for Khalil Shakir. They drafted Keon Coleman. Curtis Samuel is now a Buffalo Bill. So there's obviously help coming for the Bills, but you think about just the connection, especially over the second half of the year, that Josh Allen and Dalton Kincaid had. 5 games without Dawson Knox last year, a 21% target share. And now Dawson Knox is going to be back, and they're going to And they want to go more run heavy this year under Joe Brady full time, but Knox is more the blocking tight end. The important thing is that I think when Knox went down, Josh Allen and they were trying to figure that offense out, sort of was like, oh, I can trust Dalton Kincaid. I throw him the ball, he's going to come down with it. Kincaid has great hands. We talked about this a lot when he was drafted. And so Kincaid, who had the third most slot targets at the tight end position last year, I think he's going to be potentially the focal point of the Buffalo Bills passing offense. And so anytime you can get a guy, I think Kincaid's going to have a monster year. So just being in, given how they want to run that offense, given his talent, given the fact that it's Josh Allen, just how good the Bills' offense is, Kincaid is somebody. Then again, I am at tight end 5. I get the only question mark on him is just is the touchdowns. Will the touchdowns come? Because you do have Dawson Knox, who's a nice red zone threat, and they do have Josh is always a threat to keep it himself, and they've got James Cook, and
Yep. What is encouraging to me there, though, is that in the red zone last year, Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis combined for 27 targets between them, and they're both gone. Those are vacated. Dalton Kincaid did not score a single touchdown off of a red zone target last season. That just has to regress as the number 1 tight end.
In Tier 2, Matthew, I mentioned this briefly, but I want to go deep on this one. You have Ferguson over Pitts, and I feel like, once again, that could be a ranking that's over consensus. What kind of led you to that thought process there?
Specifically on Ferguson against Pitts, just less target competition. Athletically, it's Kyle Pitts. But Jake Ferguson is the clear-cut number 2 target for Dak Prescott. And, all due respect to Brandon Cooks, well, right, at the moment in camp, he's the number 1. I mean, if CeeDee Lamb, if they don't get this done with my guy Yates, it's going to be all Jake Ferguson. But Dak Prescott is always, he made Dalton Schultz a thing. And Ferguson is such a big target for Dak, who loves to throw to the tight end. This is somebody who led all tight ends in red zone targets. He was tied for second in end zone targets. When they get in close, Zach loves to look for big 87 there in the red zone. There were only 2 players on the Cowboys last year that had more than 81 targets, CeeDee Lamb, obviously, and Jake Ferguson. And then you think about Jake Ferguson, from Ferguson, okay, who's the number 3 guy? It's Brandon Cooks, Jalen Tolbert. It's going to be... They didn't do much in the run game either, so you'll see Zeke and Rico Dowdle, but this is going to be a pass-first offense, and it's going to be 88, which is why he's the number 1 wide receiver for everyone, and then it's going to be 87, and Jake Ferguson. And so Kyle Pitts, now we like Kyle Pitts, right? We like Kyle Pitts. We expect Kyle Pitts to have a better year under Zach Robinson, under Kirk Cousins. They've been misused, but there's something to be said about the fact that this stat is unbelievable. We think about how athletically gifted Kyle Pitts is, and yet Kyle Pitts has played 44 career games, right? 44 career games. He's got 6 touchdowns. 6 touchdowns in 44 career games. He's scored on 4% of his career receptions. And I think some of that is quarterback play and some of that is play calling, but also some of that is, by the way, when you get into the red zone, you also want to be able to run the ball. And Kyle Pitts is not a blocker. Right? So this is why they had Jonnu Smith in the red zone all the time. And so we'll see what the Falcons do this year. But, he's not going to play 100% of the snaps in the red zone. And we know Bijan Robinson is going to get a lot of red zone work this year. We figure Drake London's going to get some looks. So my argument for Ferguson over Kyle Pitts is Kyle Pitts has a lot more target competition in terms of Drake London, Bijan Robinson. You've got Darnell Mooney there as well, as opposed to Ferguson, who literally only has CeeDee Lamb. And that I think there's a pretty good chance, I feel very good about the odds that Jake Ferguson ends the year with more touchdowns than Kyle Pitts. Does Kyle Pitts pass him based on yardage and receptions? We'll see. But, so I'm right there. But, yeah, give me Jake Ferguson over Kyle Pitts, who we're still waiting. And, again, we can excuse a lot of it, right? But
eventually it runs out.
Eventually, you're at some point you got to score touchdowns to be a viable tight end in fantasy.
Yeah, I feel like Kyle Pitts is going to have a lot of 5 receptions for 54-yard games with no touchdowns, which will be fine in terms of a footballing impact, but caps your fantasy upside a bit. On Ferguson, one other thing is that the Cowboys last year, they won 9 different games by 20 points or more. They just blew teams out constantly. And so again, similar to the Ravens thing, where they just didn't have to throw in these fourth quarters because they're beating the Giants 40-0.
Let's look at tight ends 11 through 20. Now, we told you tight end number 10, David.
Before we even move on, though, can we go back to the last screen.
What do you want to say?
Well,
1 to 10?
Yeah, I want to go 1 through 10 again.
We were never there. I can't go back to what we were.
No, I want to go all the way
right,
back
1
to
to 10.
through
What do you got?
Wow.
Well, this is why. Well, I wanted to walk through.
Bruce
No,
Willis?
hang on. I wanted to just sort of walk through why the tier 1 versus the tier 2 guys, right? So I'll just walk through this real quickly. Like, as we talked about, so Laporta, Kelsey, McBride, Andrews, Kincaid, all of them elite tight ends on good offenses, should get massive target share, should be able to score touchdowns. Again, McBride and Laporta emerging, right? But Kittle is inconsistent. Again, and if Ayuk leaves, that's interesting, but in a season-long league where you're looking for consistency, as much as we love George Kittle, friend of the podcast, again, he has these big spike weeks, and then, because they have so many weapons and because he's used so much as a blocker often. Evan Ingram was all receptions last year. And so does he get that continued volume? 114 receptions was the second most by tight end in a single season in NFL history. So are we expecting Evan Ingram, even if Evan Ingram catches 90 balls this year, that would be an amazing year. And still, a big drop-off from what he did last year. And so there's a little bit of concern with Evan Ingram, again, with all the weapons they've added as well. We've just talked about Ferguson and Pitts. And the last thing I'll just say about Njoku, right? Last year, he was tight end 2 in points per game from week 7 on. But, in the games that he played with Deshaun Watson last year, he played 11 games with Deshaun Watson last year. He averaged 8.8 fantasy points per game. When he was with Joe Flacco, Jay, you may not be aware of this, but he was, comeback player of the year, Joe Flacco. With Joe Flacco, David Njoku, 18.2 fantasy points per game. So that's the one concern. It's kind of a breakup for Njoku, but it wasn't with the guy that's going to be the starting quarterback this year. So that, again, it makes you a little nervous. That's why those guys are all in tier 2. So I talk about the fact that I would feel much more comfortable with a tier 1 top 5 tight end this year. But if the draft doesn't play that way, then you've got these second tier guys. But just to understand, none of them are perfect.
Yeah, and the other thing with Njoku, it's not just that he had the rapport with Flacco, it's just that much to my chagrin, Joe Flacco was dropping back 60 times a game to just throw and throw and throw.
Jameis will do if Jameis has to play.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's going to happen at some point. Yeah. I do think it's going to happen at some point.
I agree.
I think that it might be a bit of a rougher start for David Njoku. With Kittle as well, very small thing, but just keep it in the back of our heads a little bit. Brock Purdy's looked terrible in preseason, and he's been out there for 2 games. I think Brock Purdy's fine. He was minus 250 to win the MVP with 2 weeks left in the season. It's a little bit of a concern that he's looked awful out there. So, look, he's not going to lose his job or anything, but just something to be a bit mindful of if he starts the season poorly.
I think they need Trent Williams and Brandon Ayuk back.
Yeah,
that would
quickly.
Help.
That's a big part of the Brock Purdy effect for sure. So, Njoku kicked off tier 3 for us at tight end 10, and he's joined by Dallas Goedert, Brock Bowers, T.J. Hawkinson. And then it kicks off our final tier, tier 4, which is literally everyone else.
Obviously, Hawkinson's in here just because we think he's going to miss half the season. Once he's healthy, he's a tier 1 guy.
And he could be back even earlier. They seem optimistic about his return.
Correct. So, I don't mind a flyer on T.J. Hawkinson. Bowers, just a wide range of outcomes here. Insanely talented. There are some reports they've got big plans for him. And then there's other reports where you're just listen, it's going to be a run-heavy team. They've got Michael Mayer there as well. Questionable quarterback play along with Adams and Myers. And so just how much target share can Brock Bowers, talented though he is, get? We love Goedert, but, again, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith on a team that should be, fairly balanced or even maybe run-heavy. So Goedert there in the tier 3.
Let's pull up 11 through 20 again. Jay,
Yeah.
I want your thoughts on who you like in this group at cost, right? It's not just, hey, I'll roll with, Goedert because I've seen him do it before, but at cost with 11 through 20, who do you think is somebody that you might throw a dart on or might be your first streaming option?
So, in terms of at cost, the guys I like are actually the 2 last ones in Jawan Johnson and Noah Fant, just because I don't really see much differentiation even with the guys like Pat Fryermuth, who's further up, and Dalton Schultz as well. I think we're going to talk about him at the end of the show, but just with his competition that he's going to have to deal with Tank Dell, Stephon Diggs, and Nico Collins. But to me, what is most interesting is kind of at the top of this list, where this morning Matthew had to agonize about a guillotine choice for my tight end between Dallas Goedert and Brock Bowers, and went back and forth between the two. And what ultimately had me land on Bowers was just trusting the talent and trusting the kind of institutional incentives that team is going to have to maximize him because they took him in the first round. And with Goedert, what got me off of Goedert, not just he's dealt with injuries a fair bit in his career, but it's that previously, that Eagles passing game has been just about the most defined passing game in the league, where it's A.J. Brown 1, Devontae Smith 2, Dallas Goedert 3, for nothing else. For is like Quez Watkins or Grant Calcaterra coming in. Like there was just absolutely nothing there. And I just wonder where Kellen Moore comes in, new scheme. Saquon Barkley presumably is just going to have to be used more in the passing game than they've used their running backs in the past. And so just all of that made me trust the talent of Brock Bowers. Didn't feel good about it. Don't love the Bowers already dealing with injuries, but do think there was a bit more uncertainty around Goedert, who in years past, when he's been out there, has just been rock solid, and you just pencil him in. It's very high floor.
Now, one of the guys on that list was Taysom Hill, who it depends on where you play your league, right? Because he doesn't have tight end eligibility on all platforms, but he does on Yahoo. He does on Yahoo and he does elsewhere. And so if you play on a platform where Taysom Hill has tight end eligibility, 7 different games last year with double-digit fantasy points, and the reports out of New Orleans are that Clint Kubiak is using him in even more, annoying ways for a lot of fantasy managers. But like
Denny was onto it.
Yeah, this was Denny's choice for my ride or die. We didn't go that way, but Taysom Hill is sort of interesting. You mentioned Juwan Johnson already, and Fant, who should get a much bigger target share in that revamped Ryan Grubb offense in Seattle. Tyler Conklin, Connor, 3 straight seasons with 85 targets, and now he's got Aaron Rodgers back.
New Bob Tunyon.
New Bob Tunyon.
I think Tyler Conklin's just going to walk into 7 to 8 touchdowns out of nowhere, honestly. There's not a lot in the red zone for them to throw the ball.
There really isn't. And we already mentioned Isaiah Likely. One last guy I'll just bring up is last year throughout the preseason, I kept saying how, hey, Luke Musgrave's going to be a thing this year. Well, and he wasn't, because he got hurt, and they found something in Tucker Kraft. I will just say, he's now fully healthy, Luke Musgrave. We like Jordan Love a lot. We like this Packers offense a lot. And I continue, Connor, to be fascinated by Luke Musgrave's size and speed combination. Like, again, he's got to beat out Kraft, and there's a lot of mouths to feed in that offense. But I just feel like on a talent level, there's something special about Luke Musgrave. Am I crazy?
It's such an enigma because Kraft is really good, right, in his own right.
Yeah.
Musgrave was a guy that his final college season, he played 3 games and got hurt. His rookie season, he flashed and he got hurt. So is he just a player that's just always going to be hurt, but you always want something more of? I almost look at the Packers, Jay, as I'm interested in streaming their tight end position, right? I think whoever is out there, if Musgrave's hurt, I think Kraft is going to be an impact player. If Musgrave's healthy, I think he'd be an impact player. It's almost a team that, and I'm talking about streaming. I'm not talking about drafting and starting, but you can trust the Packers at tight end with Jordan Love.
Yeah, definitely. And I think just overall, the Packers pass catchers, it's a fascinating situation because I think there are very real worlds where the Packers have the best offense in football this year, and we have no idea how to order their 4 wide receivers, let alone the tight ends, in terms of who's going to provide value. Like, that would be a very flat market if you were pricing out who's going to be the best Packers wide receiver this season. So, yeah, plenty going on there. I think in terms of the flyers for tight ends, what is important to remember is that, like, when you're taking flyers, you want variance, and you don't want to go like Dalton Schultz has no variance at all. Correct. He's older, he's in an offense with the same quarterback and same offensive coordinators last year, and all that has changed is Stephon Diggs is coming in and Tank Dell is back. So it's only going to get worse for Dalton Schultz, whereas you go further down, like Noah Fant, new offensive coordinator. Chiga Okonkwo, new regime in Tennessee. Other guys like, Ben Sinnott, he comes in, and we don't know what that is going to look like.
I'm just going to say this right now. By the way, I appreciate mentioning Ben Sinnott, who I like is an interesting guy, second half of the year. I'm just going to say this right now. He's not even getting drafted in the leagues. Zach Ertz is going to play more than, honestly, any of us expect or want him to play. Like, it's going to be a thing. Like, I tell my young daughters, I say, listen, when you're ready to get married, find somebody that looks at you the way Cliff Kingsbury looks at Zach Ertz. And then they look at me, they roll their eyes and go back to TikTok. But what's important here is that Zach Ertz, it's going to be like 6 for 34. But you're going to be like, Zach Ertz is going to be sort of a thing this year, I think, at least initially. He's gonna play more than any of us want him to. I'm just telling you. So if you're desperate in a deep league for tight end, Zach Ertz, there you go.
Fantasy football just got better this season. $1 million better. Creator join a private Yahoo Fantasy League and enter the $1 million NBC sweepstakes. Plus, earn extra entries to win when players on your roster score a touchdown during an opening weekend game that's on NBC or Peacock. Download the redesigned Yahoo Fantasy app or go to NBCSports.com/FantasyMillion to learn more. We're taking our last break. When we're back, we're looking at the best season-long props for all these tight ends we talked about. Coming right up. DraftKings Sportsbook is the #1 place to bet touchdowns, and new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets instantly. Plus, get 1 month of NFL Plus Premium. Download the app and use promo code Barry when you sign up. DraftKings
Sportsbook, the crown is yours.
It is time for last call. Let's take a look at some notable tight end props, courtesy of DraftKings. Travis Kelce, the leaderboard there, over-unders at 900.5 yards, 80.5 receptions, followed by Sam Laporta, Mark Andrews, Dalton Kincaid, George Kittle. Laporta at 850.5, Andrews at 800.5, Kincaid and Kittle both at 750.5. Jay, what tight end season-long prop are you on this year?
So I don't mean to keep piling on this bloke, but
goodness.
taking the under on Dalton Schultz, under 550.5. So last year, Dalton Schultz was second on the Texans in targets. This year, I think he's going to be fourth between Tank Dell, Nico Collins, and Stephon Diggs. Last year, Schultz had 88 targets, which per game was more than George Kittle. I just think there is going to be less usage. He played 15 games last year. That's probably about the expectation in terms of health. But I just think with the added weapons, more health for Tank Dell and Stephon Diggs coming in there, I just think that Schultz is just going to see a bit of a lesser role.
Especially because it's not like Schultz is like this great run after the catch guy. No. Right? I mean, he's getting what it's thrown, and so it just if you're not. If he's not getting the volume that he got last year, then it's hard to see him getting that number here. This one wasn't on the board here. I don't understand this market, Jay. Help me explain this line. I don't get it. But Jake Ferguson over 675.5 receiving yards. Absolutely love it. That's his line. 675 receiving yards, Jake Ferguson. He had 761 last year.
Yep.
And I think his situation is better this year than it was last year. There's less target competition. So Jake Ferguson, who I already talked about, remember Jake Ferguson ran the third most routes at the position last year. Jake Ferguson's out there all the time on what should be a very pass-heavy offense for Dak Prescott and the Cowboys here. So I don't understand it, but I love it, and I'm happy to bet it and happy to take DraftKings money here. Jake Ferguson over 675.5 receiving yards. Again, he did 761 last year, and I think he has a better year this year than he did last year.
Yep, I like that.
I'm chasing an under here, guys, and this one breaks my heart because I love Brock Bowers, but 650.5 receiving yards is a lot for any rookie tight end. And this is one now, he's dealing with a lower body injury that's heading towards the season. It sounds like he could be good to go for week one, but it just doesn't make you feel good in an offense that Devontae Adams gets a lot of targets. Jacoby Myers gets targets. They want to run the ball. Under on Brock Bowers, 650.5.
I like all those bets. All right, it's closing time. It means you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. For Jay and Connor, I'm Matthew. We'll see you tomorrow. Martavis Bryant, you drink free. Peace out. Hey, it's Matthew Berry from NBCSports.com and RotorWorld.com, and I want to thank you so much for watching whatever it is you just watched, or if nothing else, being too lazy to click out of the autoplay after this video started, after whatever it is you actually wanted to watch finished. But now that you're here, I'd like to take a moment here to ask you respectfully now, okay? I'm asking you respectfully to subscribe to the NFL on NBC YouTube channel. You'll get the latest Roto-World fantasy news headlines, all sorts of great shows, including my own Fantasy Football Happy Hour. So go subscribe now. Again, I'm asking respectfully.